The Alaska Climate Action Network is a Juneau-based citizens group, and so climate change is our main focus. We'll be having events throughout the year, especially leading up to the conference in Paris and also the 2016 election cycle. We're organizing with groups from around the state for this particular event, and we hope to continue doing that and building the movement here in Alaska.
I'm Nathan Bering, and I'm from Fairbanks, Alaska. I've lived there my entire life. I'm actually involved in about a dozen environmental groups, including Citizens for Clean Air, which is a local group in Fairbanks that works to address air quality issues around wood smoke. I'm a skier. I'm a cross-country skier. It's one of my passions right now, and I'm noticing winter rain is becoming the new normal in Fairbanks. We just had the third worst fire season on record. And bottom line, the climate is changing to the point where our winters are warming at super fast rate where the climate can't keep up. Of course, there's the classic issues that a lot of people know about, such as the melting of the polar ice caps, permafrost melt, which is releasing methane that causes even more change at a faster rate because it's a more potent gas than carbon dioxide for holding in sun rays. The increased wildfires because summers are getting hotter and drier. There are warmed winters where we have ice storms, coastal erosion that's causing communities like Shishmaref to actually have to relocate some of their residents because they can't live there on the coast anymore where they've lived their entire lives and their ancestors have lived there. Bottom line, I think that the science has been telling us this for decades, that it's time for us to make a change and that fossil fuels just are not working anymore. And so I'm not calling for the immediate abandonment of all fossil fuels because that's ridiculous and our economy is really dependent on them still. I'm just looking for a peaceful but fast, peaceful, and progressive transition from fossil fuels to clean energy sources so we can work to address this before it gets out of hand and there is no turnaround point. Yeah, well, I definitely generally agreed on Obama with his term. I was very happy that he passed the Clean Energy Power Plant plan where it wants to cut coal emissions by a certain year, approving Shell to drill. I think it's ridiculous. I think that the time for no new development is long past. This economy needs to be diversified, and that was not a helpful move. I was quite shocked, actually, when he decided to pass this. He's downing his legacy. He's been one of the most progressive presidents ever in transitioning for climate change progress and transitioning to cleaner energy, and I just wish he'd stay on the same path, and this seemed to just be a cutoff that he didn't need to take. We are experiencing climate impacts twice as fast as any other state in the United States right now, and if we don't pass legislation that will help us transition off fossil fuels, we're looking in for a rough ride in the next few decades. I mean, if we just continue living the way that we're living, it's going to become harder and harder to change, and I think that it's a moral issue, it's a social issue, and it's a justice issue. And I'm trying to work as hard as I can to start to foster change, and I hope that the rest of the world will start to as well. If you are under 18, you can contact the Alaska Center for the Environment and search AYEA, which stands for Alaska Youth for Environmental Action, to get oriented. There is Rising Tide, which is an organization that is working on issues because the ocean levels are rising. There's sitkawild.org, which is a conservation based off of Sitka. We are right now in this town that I'm in right now, even though I'm an Anchorage resident, I'm helping with this Earth Care Jamboree, which is a group of many churches and interfaith organizations that are coming together to openly talk about ways that they can work together from a faith-based perspective on climate change and bring more people in.
The views, the opportunity, and the culture are some of the many things that have kept my family here for a generation, and as well as yours. These same attributes will continue to keep people here if we take action today and from now on. Thousands come to Alaska yearly to experience what so many of us Alaskans seem to take for granted. Being immersed in such beauty, such cultural richness, and steady wealth, a lot of us don't stop and think that all of these things Alaska is known for, all the things we do to make this state prosperous, could easily slip from our fingers. The life Native Alaskans try so hard to preserve and fight for could be lost. And unfortunately, it will if we don't take a stand and continue to educate ourselves and one another about the issues at hand. Just like how all of us stand together and call this beautiful state home, we must also stand together and preserve, sustain, and protect this beautiful state we call home. New evidence is being revealed every day, warning us what is happening to our glaciers, our ocean, and our landscapes, and most importantly, our environment. The bottom line is we cannot let drilling occur. We definitely can't let it occur here. Drilling has always been an unsafe project, devastating and ruining the people who inhabit. My family has been based in the lower 48 for many generations, particularly within the South. My family has made a very good living working as entrepreneurs, farmers, clergy members, and fishermen. 2010 was a very hard year for my family. A lot of bills went unpaid. Homes went back on the market. Mouths weren't being fed. My family's comfortable lifestyle was compromised by something that could have easily been avoidable. It's not easy telling your children you can't support them like you once did, or calling distant family in hopes of getting a loan or a place to lay your head. But sadly, this is the predicament that the Gulf of Mexico oil spill put my family in. It was one thing having BP drill in such a vital and vulnerable location, but it's another thing how they polluted the area, neglected it, as well as its people. I first-handedly seen the effects of this disastrous spill, and unfortunately, I will say that it could happen here. The truth of the matter is that no one or nothing is immune from such practices. Not the animals, not us, and not this state. I am against drilling here in Alaska because I know the effects and I know what they could be. I know what could be jeopardized. In particular, I can't help but to think what could be lost with the people directly involved. When their ancestors have worked so hard to teach a certain way of life, to instill the values within their hearts and minds, inspiring them to keep the culture and the traditions alive. Much more is at hand than money here. The control, the power, the politics. We could experience cultures together weakening. Their ways of life could become jeopardized, just as the lives of my family members. It isn't easy having everything you worked so hard for become extinguished. It's not something we can repair overnight, I understand that. Alaska is only as beautiful as its environment and that is its people. But what happens to Alaska when these two both come jeopardized? We must ask ourselves, what should we do to preserve and sustain our backyards, our way of life, and our cultures? We must push forward to keep the state beautiful, to keep it pure, and uphold the name that everyone has given us, the last frontier. Thank you.
It will take meaningful policy to make anything real happen. Do you realize that only about 10% of carbon emissions really come from residential areas? We can all do our best, but it's going to take economic and political policy if anything real is going to happen here. Not only nationally, though, we need political leaders in Alaska to take action. Now is obviously the time to address Alaska's budget woes, yes. But now is also the time to do it with a carbon-free future in mind. How do we get from here to there? It's not by going for more and more carbon fossil fuels. Alaska cannot opt out of being part of the solution. The pain that we're feeling is not just about us, and it's just not just about today. It's about the world and about the world's future. We need also for the political leaders of the Glacier Conference to show their leadership. Political maneuvering that avoids united worldwide action is not acceptable. This is a time for uniting to save the world. It's a time for leadership. Thank you.
My message to President Obama is this. I think you're one of the finest presidents this nation has ever had, right? Particularly considering the alternative. However, we expected more from him on environmental issues, on sustainable low-carbon energy, and on climate change. We expected more. We continue to expect more in his final 15 months in office. In fact, we demand more. It's not enough to simply say we're concerned about this issue, to reiterate time and time again what the consequences are. We need action, and we need it yesterday. I'm very concerned that the administration still doesn't get the extent, the severity of the issue, and particularly the extent of the response that is required to actually fix it. And there's a few things I'll mention about that. The U.S. commitment to reduce carbon for the Paris talks in December is about half of what it needs to be. If he's really serious about addressing climate change at the scale that it needs to be addressed at, he needs to double down today, tomorrow, and Wednesday here in Alaska and announce that the United States is going to double our carbon emissions reductions. Right now, the only thing the administration is committed to is about to reduce U.S. carbon emissions to the 1990 level, about 5 billion tons of CO2. The European Union has committed to reduce it 40% below the 1990 level, and even Russia, our neighbor just to the west, has committed to reducing it 25 to 30% below the 1990 level. So the point here is even Russia has a much more dramatic carbon reduction goal than does the United States. And that, to me, is a little bit embarrassing, and it should be. Okay, everybody wave. All right. Hello, Department of Defense. Woohoo! Now, the president can do this, but we all realize the blocks he has in Congress, to some extent from our delegation. The politics in Alaska, the politics of oil, have a very strong inertia around this issue because they've made well on status quo. They do well on that. But we need to make sure the president does the right job here. The second issue is the deal with China that the president made last year is atrocious. It requires China to cap their carbon emissions in 2030, not until then. And if they are increasing carbon emissions by 7% a year, they could conceivably double their carbon emissions before they are required by this deal to cap it. And any deal that allows the number one emitter of CO2 to double their emissions is no deal that we can live with, period. Something I think everybody who lives in Alaska loves and uses the oceans a lot. Right now, there's not 1 square inch of permanently protected federal offshore waters in Alaska, not 1 square inch. All the protections are temporary. They could go away from President Trump, excuse me. They could go away at any time. So we are calling on the president to use his executive authority and establish marine national monuments in the Aleutians, Bering Strait, and the Arctic Ocean that are permanently protected, at least from offshore oil and gas drilling, and in some places restricting damaging bottom trawling and managing shipping and other threats, invasive species and contaminants better. Yeah, there you go, sister, say it. Finally, the state's got to get some skin in this game too. And part of the call that Kirby and the gang put together for this effort is spot on. The state, under the last 6 years under Sean Parnell, has completely ignored climate change. And of any state in the nation, of any regional government in the world to do that, this is the last place that should do it. We need to reconvene. Yes, we need to reconvene the Alaska Climate Change Subcabinet, establish an Alaska Climate Change Response Fund to help the villages in rural Alaska do what they need to do. And off a 10-cent a barrel tax off the Trans-Alaska Pipeline, that'd be $20 million a year. That would start. So the state needs to get its skin in the game. And I think we're pretty well wrapped up here. So thanks very much. Thanks for coming out. Keep the faith, and we'll keep the action going. Thank you.
All right. I've been speaking to policymakers a lot lately and hearing their thought process and realizing that they seriously need us to show up and put pressure on things now, that we are indeed at the hinge point of history. We don't have time to do anything but action on every front: mitigation, litigation, adaptation. We need it all. The Intergovernmental whatever it was called, Commission on Climate Change, has said that we are, of course, in danger of severe and pervasive and irreversible changes if we do not act now.